Welcome to the video. In this video I'd like to take a look at this plane here. This is the Avios Zazzy from Hobby King. Now we've looked at a couple of planes recently and this is one that I've been waiting for since summer, because back in summer I attended the Hobby King live event here in the UK and saw this plane for the very first time. Now, there's a number of planes that were dotted around the event. Unfortunately, didn't have any details on them, and I'd never seen this plane before. It was so interesting, I actually ended up snapping these photographs that we've just looked at. And finally managed to get my hands on one. Now, this is about 160 odd quid from Hobby King at the moment. All the specs are on the website. What I want to do in this video really is talk about a couple of things. First, we'll go through some of the specs, because this is really a sports plane, very easy to fly, but we'll talk about that in a minute, but with tons and tons of power. Then we'll go and show you what comes in the box. It's pretty easy to put together. Only really need to install the rear tail bits and pieces, the main wings, and the landing gear as well, and you're pretty much ready to fly. Then I'll show you some video of it actually flying, show you what it's like, and then we'll come back and talk about what it's been like to live with over the past couple of weeks. First thing I'll talk about, of course, is that you'll have noticed that there's a little pilot in here. That is absolutely not standard. That is something that we've added because we goof around with everything. If you want to see how we added BB-8 into this model, then I'll direct you to this little video down here in the bottom right hand corner, and we go through the process. By default, it doesn't come with a BB-8, but this lovely big canopy and the fact that the little pretend seat that's there for a pilot drops out, and it just cries out to have a pilot in there, so it looks more scale. Let's talk a little bit about the specs. It's a 1.3 meter wingspan, 51 inches. Flying weight is a couple of kilograms with a nice decent size 4-cell battery. Although it's quite heavy, the size of the wings and the model in particular make it very easy to fly. Some of the other models that we've tried that are kind of approaching that weight, that have smaller, stubbier wings, have been more tricky to fly and have much smaller envelopes. You can't get away with lower throttles. This one is a very well behaved model because of its size. So although 2 kilograms sounds like a lot, because it's a little bit bigger, it handles that beautifully. 4 9-gram servos, all metal geared. They're kind of hidden away in the wings already and they're covered up. We'll look at that in a sec. The motor and ESCs are Aerostar. The motor is an Aerostar 3550 900 kV, spinning a 12x6 prop, and it's got a whacking 50 amp speed controller in there as well. You will need a 4S battery for this. I was running ours on a 3000, although probably a 4000 would have been slightly better. The 3000 I find had to be really snucked under the nose in order for the centre of gravity to be about right. You only need a 4-channel receiver. You don't need anything particularly fancy for this because all of the controls are nicely presented inside. So let's talk about what actually comes in the box. The box is very nicely laid out. All the graphics kind of let you know about the goodness inside, and when you take the top off, then the first thing you'll spot is the manual, and under that is one of the wings. It's pretty well packed. You have these kind of spars across the top protecting it from damage. The manual itself is lovely, very high colour, really easy to follow, lots and lots of nice pictures, so it's a piece of cake. The throws in here I'd recommend, if you're going to be doing sport flying, go for the high throws, but the lower throws are actually great for everyday mooching about. The wings come in one big piece, the servos are already installed, and ours were perfectly set up, so they were at 90 degrees when we started to configure the radio. Next thing I pulled out of the box was the horizontal stabilizer at the back. It's just one big piece that goes on there, and again all the decals and everything are already attached and seem to have been applied with a little bit of care. Nice to see that the underside has some different markings to help with orientation when you're flying. Again, do make sure that all these kind of hinges you do work before you start putting the plane together. It will move a lot more freely when you finally get it in one piece. The carbon spar for the wings is absolutely huge. You do need this because it is a larger model, but it's surprising when you're used to smaller planes to kind of pull that out and see how big and beefy that tube actually is. The landing gear comes next. So this is the front part of the landing gear with these two pods. It will cope with slightly rough surfaces, but this is a plane that you can land or take off from really uneven ground without having a problem. So do think about that. You're going to need some kind of road, runway or asphalt if you want to take this thing off and land it safely. And then the last thing out of the box is obviously the body. Now the motors and everything are pre-installed, and there's that lovely bubble canopy on the top, and here you can see what it looks like before we started messing around adding pilots in there. Now, a couple of things you'll spot here is, first of all, we have kind of pins by the side. Now, we saw pins like this recently reviewing another one of the Hobby King brands. It was the Tundra plane, and it's nice to see it on here too. The connections are even beefier on this model, so when you slide the wings on, they automatically make all the connections. To open the hatch, you have to push back on this little spring-loaded catch at the back, so no relying on magnets here. And once you get the canopy off, there is absolutely tons and tons and tons of room inside. So lots of room up in the nose for the battery, and to pop your receiver and thing in here is going to be easy because they've put little tags on each of the servo connectors, so it's just a case of plugging them into the right channel. So once you've got all your pieces ready, the only two things I didn't show actually, which you do need to dig around in the box for, I nearly put my box away without finding these, are the spinner and the prop itself. The prop is carbon fibre, the spinner isn't. So now we've got the pieces, putting it together is really straightforward. First of all is pop on the wings. You just put that great big whacking carbon tube through the hole in the body, and then you just push on the wings, and they come home with a satisfying little snick at the end as those pins engage. And then if you flip it over, each of the wings are held in place by two little screws. Now that's very handy because transporting this thing gets a little bit interesting. With it being such a big model, I found that this is the first model of this type where I've actually had to take a wing off in order to get it into the boot of the car. So the fact that you can undo two screws and remove a wing for transport is great. Those screws are going into captive metal sleeves as well underneath, so constant undoing and redoing isn't going to strip out any plastic. Quick point to note, there is some nice touches in here. Each of the little bags of screws is very clearly identified which is which, so keeping track of which screw needs to go in which hole is a piece of cake. Occasionally with some of these planes you tend to find that you get one big bag of bits. This made it a really simple job to put it all together. Installing the horizontal stabilizer is pretty straightforward. First of all is you kind of just lay it into position and you retain it with one bolt at the front. That just keeps it in place. Once you've got that in position, then the vertical stabilizer actually goes over the top, and that has two posts that go into position, and you screw that into place below and you're good. Installing the landing gear is pretty straightforward. All you do is you just remove this little piece of polystyrene, pop on the landing gear and screw it in. I found that the tail wheel that's at the back of the model was a little bit tricky to put together. It's all documented in the manual, but for us we had to play around with the angle of the tail wheel a little bit so it was nice and free and it wasn't binding the rudder at all. So now we've put it together, let's talk about how she flies. There's no denying that this is a very pretty plane to look at. When it's in the air, it doesn't really give away its size at all, not only in the way it looks but in the way it flies. It will go along at 20% throttle, or if you give it the beans, it's fantastic for aerobatics, loops, rolls, cubinesses, all kinds of stuff. It's a very capable plane. It isn't a 3D plane, but it's a very nice, comfortable flyer. I was a little bit worried about extra weight and size of the model, but when it's in the air, it just means that you can fly it a little bit further away without feeling that you've lost orientation. I think initially the Avios brand had a little bit of a bad reputation from some of the models they've made, and this is the first Avios model that I've got here from Hobby King. Hopefully, as you just saw in that landing, I managed to bring it in and float it down and not do any damage, even though I'm not landing it on something like tarmac, which is what the gear is really made for. In summary, this is a plane we really like. We have other models, things like the Night Walrus, that are probably the ones that if we just want a nice relaxing flight, those are the ones we go for. So this is not a plane that I would recommend for anyone but an upper, intermediate or advanced pilot. This is another model that's going to stay in the hangar, not just because of the effort we've put into adding an animated BB-8 into the cockpit, but more because it's a very easy, relaxing plane to fly. But if you want to, you can pop it into high rates, give it a little bit of throttle, and do some craziness as well. Thank you for taking the time to watch that video. There are lots of other videos on the channel and they're carefully ordered into playlists, so you may find that there are other videos on this same subject that you can go and watch. So I would recommend going into the playlist area of Painless 360 YouTube channel and looking around and seeing what there is. You never know what you might find. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and happy flying.